Hello and welcome into the KE Report. I'm your host, Shad Markwitz, and today we're getting an update on SURG Copper. SURG Copper is traded on the TSX.V under the ticker SURG and on the OTCQX under the ticker SRGXF. It's also traded on the Frankfurt Exchange under the ticker G6D2. And I'm joined today with the CEO and director of SURG Copper, Leif Nilsson. And Leif, it's great to get you back on the show. It's been a couple months since we chatted. And I think just from a big picture standpoint, it'd be nice just to dig into the value proposition from the Berg Project. This is a copper, molybdenum, silver, and gold project in British Columbia that you've been de-risking for a number of years now. And you've got a PEA in place back from June of 2023. You've built a big resource here. And we've got some current work programs underway, and we will dig into that here in just a moment. But just from a high level, remind people listening in the value proposition of the Berg Project.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on again, Chad. Good to be here as always. So, yeah, the very simple Coles notes on Berg is it's a big standalone copper development project in a great location in British Columbia, close to the types of infrastructure that you need for these sorts of things, including, roads, hydroelectric power, ports. It's in an established mining district. We often say we're quite close to one of the other similar copper porphyry operations in BC called Huckleberry. But yeah, Berg is a standalone project. There's about a billion ton resource there, a billion tons of mineralized material in the M&I categories, containing just over 5 billion pounds of copper, over 600 million pounds of moly, 150 million ounces of silver, plus some gold. And as you mentioned, there was a first ever preliminary economic assessment that we published on it in 2023. Pretty solid economics from that. Obviously, lots of stuff has improved since then, some of which has been the technical work that we've advanced as we've been, bringing the project toward pre-feasibility. So we put out some excellent metallurgical results from a year-long MET program just about a month ago. Same thing on sort of geotech, some great resource delineation drilling that's happened over the last couple of years. And obviously, the metal price environment in the backdrop has strengthened considerably since 2023. So things seem to be shaping up pretty well for the project as we approach pre-feasibility. And yeah, probably last thing I'll say, like just big picture context for people to understand. If this was a mine that was in operation today, based on the life of mine average numbers that we outlined in that PEA, this would constitute the second largest copper mine in Canada. And the byproduct molybdenum production would make it the largest moly producer in Canada by almost a factor of 10. So we try to really position this in people's minds as a really large, really sort of favorably positioned critical minerals project. And it would be a very important, resilient supplier of moly for the North American market, you could say. But it's not a primary moly mine. It's got this very large, very robust copper business that underpins it. So pretty unique critical minerals development project from that vantage point.
Yeah, I appreciate you breaking that down for folks listening in. And I think it's unique in the sense that when you look at copper porphyries, there's often moly and precious metals that occur with the copper. In this case, you actually have a little bit higher grade moly than a lot of other deposits. So you have a nice kicker there, but still a copper forward, copper primary project. That's what drives the bus. But having a nice moly credit and the critical mineral side of things is obviously a nice advantage for the company as well. And as you say, you're building towards the PFS and you're also building towards a resource update. Now, you had the press release that came out to the market just on August the 14th, and it gets into some of the work the team is doing on the ground this season. And part of that, one of the flavors of drilling you're doing is this resource drilling, about 1,500 meters, but you also have a couple different flavors of drilling going on here. So it's not just resource drilling. So maybe walk us through all three elements of the drill bit and what you're trying to achieve with each of those areas and campaigns.
Absolutely. So this is the last field program we expect to have before finalizing a pre-feasibility study. So as a result, it's a hive of activity. There's a lot of different programs that are taking place to kind of put finishing touches on different data sets that are critical inputs to that PFS. So it's not your normal field program where we're just out doing exploration and resource drilling. There's a lot of sort of engineering components to the program as well. So Resource drilling is actually probably one of the smaller pieces. The resource at Berg is already big. It's already quite advanced. As I mentioned, there's 1 billion tons in the measured and indicated resources. So we've already completed a lot of our, needed inferred conversion, but there's always room around the edges to do more of that. So we talked about in that release that there was about 3 holes completed for 1,500 meters, and that portion of the program is basically done, but there's an option that we might come back and marginally expand it later in the season once the other stuff is done. In parallel with that, we have other rigs that are working on what we call ARD and metal leaching drilling analysis. So these are drill holes that are being angled into the waste envelope or the waste tonnage that sits within the conceptual pit. And yeah, we're looking to characterize the sulfide abundance in that waste rock to understand whether it's, potentially acid generating or non-acid generating, which is, really important information when you're looking at engineering and designing, waste rock installations and tailings facilities and things like that. So that program is adding to other work that has been done in prior years, but for this year we're anticipating 4 holes for just under 2,000 meters specific to that. 2 of those holes, for what it's worth, are already completed as of today. So we've got 2 more to go. And then there's an important geotech program happening in the infrastructure area of the project footprint. So last year, we did a big program for those purposes in the pit. We had a big news release about that a couple months ago. This year, the focus is moving to some of the ancillary areas around the pit where things like conveyors, things like the tailings facility, the mill and concentrator, all that kind of important infrastructure areas would go. And so this program involves about 12 holes. They're pretty shallow holes in general because the purpose of them is to characterize the surface rock conditions in the till layer and the upper few meters of basement rock. And so average hole length for these is around 60 meters. So it's a 12 hole program for around 700 meters in total. And that portion's just gotten kicked off. So we've completed 2 of those to date. And in parallel with that, we're doing some seismic lines over that area as well, which will help us characterize the shape and depth and distribution of sediments in that area. So we're doing about 19 seismic lines in that area for about 3,700 meters in total. So as a result, lots of different professionals at the camp right now, working on or supporting all of those different programs. And yeah, it's a very busy season in all.
I liked what you said there. That was a hive of activity because, yeah, you've got the resource drilling, the geotech drilling, the ARD drilling, looking at the different dynamics that'll feed into the PFS. And then you have some of those surveys going on, as you just mentioned, and doing some of those lines. So a lot of things going on. And then you're also still doing some of the baseline studies and some of the things that would work towards environmental and engineering. And so maybe just speak to any other work that the team is doing on the ground that'll feed data into the upcoming PFS.
That's it. I mean, so on the environmental side, that's forms part of the PFS, but I guess the bigger picture there is around environmental assessment readiness. So we plan in the near future to bring this project to the pre-feasibility level and finalize a pre-feasibility study. And in parallel with that, we want to bring the project to a position of what we call EA readiness. So that's completing all of the necessary preparations to allow us to make a decision at the time we want to enter the EA process, which is, it's gathering a lot of data around environmental baseline. So we've got those programs underway right now, but there's a lot of kind of more qualitative soft aspects to that as well around agreements with other stakeholders, early engagement with certain ministries in the government, et cetera. So lots of programs being progressed, not just to get all the data in place for a PFS, but also to prepare us to approach the environmental assessment process as well.
Well, and we talked at the onset that you did this big metallurgical study earlier in the year, and it just came out fairly recently. We did chat about that last time we talked, but for those that missed that discussion, maybe just give them the quick like you say, Cole's Note version of it, what were the main takeaways from this metallurgical study that you undertook? Because it was a pretty advanced program, and I think some of the takeaways were pretty promising as far as metals recoveries and what you anticipate as far as that data moving into this PFS.
Yeah, very promising results. The team, both at SURG and our consultants involved with the stuff are very happy with the outcome there. So Cole's Notes is when we put out the PEA in 2023, we were relying entirely on a corpus of test work data from prior operators from 15 years prior. It was a robust body of work. Really nothing wrong with it, but we certainly saw opportunities for improvement. And so when we tabled the PEA, it had assumptions in there that we believed were conservative, and we pointed to that as a follow-on objective that we were going to progress that body of work, and thought there was a lot of opportunity for upside. Away we went. We undertook a year-long program that involved sort of a volume of test material that was roughly equal to everything that had been done prior to that. So it was almost like a doubling of the volume of test work. And yeah, we sort of refined our understanding of the flow sheet dynamics, and ultimately published PFS ready or PFS level results that point to a pretty significant increase in recoveries for the key metals that we care about. So in the case of copper, we could see those moving from what were in the PEA, kind of the low 80 range, to something in the mid to slightly above mid 80 range. And then in the case of moly, it was sort of in the low to mid 70s, and we could see that come up by 10 percentage points. So pretty impactful from a NSR and NPV perspective. And so, yeah, pretty happy to see those results. And for what it's worth, the flow sheet here is very traditional. There's like nothing novel or unique about it. These are just typical sulfide flotation circuits. So we're just looking at crushing, grinding, run-of-the-mill type comminution, no pun intended, and then bulk flotation of everything into a bulk concentrate, and then a second stage separation of the moly into its own standalone concentrate. So we'd have a copper con product that has nice byproducts of silver and gold, and then a separate concentrate of moly. So this program that we published results on showed very strong recoveries under both of those components, and clean final products, and is going to give us the confidence to underpin more robust recovery assumptions in that PFS.
Yeah, and I think one of the big breakthroughs was that separation of the moly into its own concentrate. That was another kind of, not necessarily a breakthrough, but like a confirmation of the metallurgical work you did, that you start off with the bulk con and then separate out the moly, but then the copper con has the precious metals with it. Very desirable products from end users, and I think the fact that it is simple and straightforward is another perk, Leif, just because some projects have such complex metallurgical processes that there's a lot of question marks. You kind of want it to be a little bit more simple and straightforward, especially if it's a large operator down the road that wants to acquire the project and do some of that. They want simple. Simplicity is good in metallurgical work. So just some nice things that came out of the metallurgical work from this big program that you did earlier in the year. And then again, as we've been mentioning, you're going to have a resource update, and the pre-feasibility study is really going to wrap more economics around the project, more details. It's a lot more intense than the PEA is going to be. Do you have a rough guideline for the time on when you can expect that out to the market?
No, we've described the process there to the market as this recent fundraising we undertook, which I can speak to in a moment, is giving us runway to complete that pre-feasibility study and EA readiness that I've spoken to. The rough expected timeline is early next year, but basically this geotech drilling that and ARD drilling that I spoke about earlier, these are critical inputs to that PFS, and this is work that we're in some cases doing for the first time, like on the infrastructure area. This is like the first program that we're doing these level of technical investigations. So we do need to get through that portion of the field program where we at least have a reasonable degree of certainty on the types of results that we're seeing, and that everything's going to be as expected. So we should be in that position in maybe like a month or 2 months, following which we will probably put out more granular guidance to the market in terms of timing for completing the PFS. But that stuff is all underway in parallel. So we've got trade-off studies happening related to the PFS and the beginning stages of the engineering design, cost estimation, all that stuff. So we're on track and we're moving on that path that should achieve that kind of Q1 timeline. But in terms of sort of formal guidance around that, we're just going to wait until we complete some critical aspects of this year's field program before we table that to the market.
Okay, appreciate you giving us a rough idea then. So maybe the beginning of next year for Q1 is kind of the target at this point. When you have a more firm plan on it, let us know. We'll get you back on. We'll do an update at that time. And then also, just as far as the capital side of the business, I know that you have a financing that's open right now and you're building towards that. Just talk to us about that part of the business, Leif, and will that give you enough runway to get through the PFS?
Yeah, so it will. I mean, that was the design of the financing, was to give us runway for those two overarching strategic objectives I've mentioned, PFS and EA readiness. The Coles notes there, we announced a $10.4 million financing in early July, basically consisting of two pieces. There was a $5.9 million quasi-public offering. So this is the life portion of the offering that was offered to normal investors. And then there was a second piece, which was a $4.5 million strategic investment, which is essentially our existing strategic investor arm, increasing their ownership from 15% to 19.9%. So there was obviously a kind of a negotiated outcome with them there. And that was a big piece that underpinned the financing. And so taking those two pieces together totals 10.4 million. We did close the life portion of that, the 5.9 million, in late July. And we're still at this point just in the stages of finalizing a fairly standard regulatory approval that we need for the strategic investment portion. So we do expect that to close at some point in September.
Why don't you talk really quickly about African Rainbow just as a strategic investor for people not familiar with them?
Yeah, sure. South African diversified mining company listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Operators and mine builders, they're not a financial entity, they're a operating company, but they have interests in a range of different mining assets in that region of the world that span things like iron ore, manganese, PGMs, nickel, some coal, things like that. No copper, no copper production today. So I think their investment in SURG is one part of their exposure to copper, or their kind of longer term strategy there. They also have a pretty substantial strategic investment in Harmony Gold, which is sort of dates back to the beginning of that enterprise. But they have some, interesting exposure to some bigger stuff through their investment in Harmony. But yeah, very solid organization, lots of expertise around on the technical side of things, operations, CSR, et cetera. So we're like a year into this partnership now. So we closed on their initial strategic investment where they acquired 15% in May of last year, 2024. So they've been sort of involved with us for a little bit over a year. It's a great relationship. I think they are a collaborative group of people. We work very well together. They provide a lot of input to what we're doing through a formal technical committee. And yeah, I think that sort of provides the backdrop, I guess, to why there was a mutual desire to see them increase their interest from 15% to 19.9. It's sort of proof that the last year has gone very well for both sides of that equation.
Yeah, always nice to see a big strategic increase their size and participate again. And I think for people not familiar with African Rainbow Minerals ARM, a very solid partner to have in the mining sector. And then I guess just as we wrap up, Leif, any final thoughts you want to share with investors as far as the big picture vision of the company? Because there's a lot of choices in copper resources. There's a lot of choices in copper stocks. Some are earlier stage exploration, some are producing companies. But in this middle segment of the development stage companies, I think you have a lot of pluses and a lot of reasons to give yourself a pat on the back for all the hard work the team has done. But just talk to people listening about how SURG Copper is positioned in the copper development space.
Yeah, this is a porphyry copper project. And a phrase I use often with investors and market participants is that porphyry copper projects or mines are the bread and butter of where our world gets its copper from. It's something like 2/3 of global copper production comes from these styles of deposits. They're really big. They tend to be on the lower grade end of the spectrum, but they are, relatively simple operations, from a bulk tonnage perspective, like large material movement, but long mine life, pretty stable grade profile, cash flow profile, etc. So they tend to be quite attractive to big mining companies, whether you're talking about incumbents in the copper business or the big diversified miners who have, maybe for the last 10, 15 years been really focused on the iron ore sector. Those types of companies are also really interested in these types of deposits. And so, yeah, for investors looking to get exposure to copper, there's lots of different ways to do it. And in the sort of junior development space, you have some companies out there that are advancing smaller projects they're just a different flavor. It's a bit of a different exposure. But I think if you're looking at the segment of the market that is porphyry copper development, there's really some key things you want to see, which is located in a good jurisdiction. And part of that is the risk equation, the rule of law, all the sort of costs associated with operating there. But perhaps equal or more importantly is the needed infrastructure there. So these are big projects. They're not like gold mines where you can, fly your product out with a helicopter. You need access to roads or maybe, railways, definitely ports. You need access to electricity if you're not going to generate it yourself. So those are really key things when looking at these projects. So, the grade, the style of mineralization or the tenor of mineralization is only one part of it. You got to have these other pieces of the puzzle in place. And that is it's that kind of holistic view that makes us very excited about what we're doing at SURG. The Berg Project it profiles very well against a lot of stuff out there in the world. It's got that sort of size going for it. It's in a really excellent location. BC is a great jurisdiction for all those kind of basic reasons, but even where we are in the province is close to all that infrastructure that you need. We're in an established mining area of the province. And it's a really simple project. So again, a lot of other things out there, you might see a headline economics or production profile that would maybe compare very similarly to Berg, but you got to go a couple layers down in the onion and figure out what's being assumed there in terms of complexity in the flow sheet. Are you changing metallurgical processes several times in the life of mine? That means you got to commission a mill several times. There's a lot of risk involved in that. Are you carving out CapEx associated with some of that super important infrastructure? Is it not kind of included in the big picture? Those are a lot of things that I see out there. So I think Berg is a really nice project that people should have on their radar because it's the right size, it's in the right area, and it's got a lot of low risk features to it that make it attractive to big mining companies out there, such as ARM, who have made a pretty big investment in us.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up on that point. But yeah, the Berg project checks a lot of boxes, and it's not just the grade and the size of the project. It's the infrastructure in place. It's the rule of law. It's the ability to get it permitted. It's all the other ancillary things. It's the metallurgical work, the process, the simplicity of that, as we discussed earlier. So a lot of check boxes on the Berg project, and we'll definitely keep following along with it here at the KE Report. For those of you listening in, if you want to get more information, definitely click on the link down in the show notes. It takes you over to the SURG Copper website, straight to their news section where you can follow along with news updates as they hit the wire. Check out the corporate presentation, do a deeper dive. If you have any questions, definitely email them into me. I'll make sure we get those over to Leif for review. And Leif, always great to have you on the show. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Thanks very much. Talk to you soon.